Hey everybody, Charlie here, and I thought I would give you guys a preview of how my streaming setup works, and also, I guess, the recording setup as well, and also talk about why I do certain things. I've had some requests for stuff like this, so I figured I would give it a shot. So what you're seeing right now on the screen is, this is what my screen looks like when I'm live streaming. I've got a big window here for the chat. I've got my OBS window here and all the different elements that go with it. We have OBS Live installed within this because I'm integrated with Stream Elements really heavily. So this is the Stream Elements window, and so is this. And when you activate OBS Live, it likes to put these windows into the actual OBS interface, but I don't like them there at all. So I'm really happy that you can actually just drag them out and put them separately next to it. So that's how I do it. I have my task manager over here. And this will tell me my CPU utilization. It's very important for me since I'm a CPU encoder when I'm streaming. And then I also have the Streamlabs chat bot over here as well. I use both Stream Elements and Streamlabs as well as a couple of other bots, and they all share my Charbot Twitch account. So when you are looking at Charbot talking in chat, it could be either one of these bots, but you're gonna see them as one bot anyway. Okay, so let's talk about settings really quick. If I go into settings really quick here, this is what we look at. Oh, and if you're wondering, if you're like, hey, how are you recording this and also like not showing it? Like, how are you recording this right now? You can actually open a separate instance of OBS if you want to. So this is what I'm actually using to record right now. This is writing the file that you're watching right now. You can have multiple iterations of OBS opened at once and completely different scenes open in them as well. You simply can't use the same video capture device in both at the same time. So for example, I can't have both of them using game capture. I can't have both of them using display capture on the same display at the same time. I can't have both of them using the exact same webcam at the same time. So if I tried to put this webcam up here, for example, and activate it, you would see it appear here, but you wouldn't see my camera because this iteration of OBS is already using that camera in a hidden scene. So just keep that in mind, but you can absolutely do two different iterations. This is how I was doing Kerbal Space Program for a little bit when we were live streaming it, but I wanted to make sure my camera and stuff wasn't in the recorded file. I would stream it with this. I would open up a separate iteration of OBS, and then the stream would have display capture and the game would have game capture, and that's how I was grabbing that. So anyway, that's how that works. Let's get that off the screen. So for output and stuff, I will always use advanced output mode because this gives me the flexibility I want. Currently, I'm streaming X264 at 1080p, 60 frames per second. Now, this is with a dedicated stream box. Just as a record here, I do not recommend you stream at 1080p 60. I know that the temptation is there, and you're like, hey, you know, this is the resolution that's high quality, yo. But the thing is, if you don't have the hardware to drive that quality to make it look really good, then you're gonna make your stream look even worse. I definitely recommend 720p to anyone out there that's doing it, or some people do 900p. Technically 864p is better just because it divides better with, like, you know, either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. Point is, since I have a dedicated stream box and this is a Threadripper, I do 1080p 60. Okay, so bitrate here, I have it at 7500. I probably just bump this up to 8K. That's I'm finding that this is like a great compromise bitrate here. Twitch is a little bit finicky with higher bitrates than 8K. But it's been widely known that everyone's like, the 6K is the maximum bitrate. No, it's not. It's not. If you click this box, Enforce Streaming Service Encoder Settings, if you have this box checked, then yes, 6K is the maximum bitrate you're gonna get, because OBS is gonna see the streaming service encoder settings and it's not gonna let you do it. Uncheck this box and you can do 8K. That being said, if you're not a partnered streamer, make sure you have transcoding, AKA quality options, for the broadcast when you start. Otherwise, this is gonna heavily limit your ability to retain viewership and exposure, because what your bitrate is your upload rate in kilobits per second. And if you don't have transcoding, a person will need 8 megabits per second consistently to download your stream. Like, they have to have it consistent. So if it dips below that at any point in time, they're gonna start skipping and buffering and falling out of sync with you. Highly recommend you do not do a bitrate this high if you do not have transcoding, because it is not a good idea. You're basically isolating your stream to just desktop users at that point, because a reliable speed at this rate for mobile users is pretty sketchy, pretty touch and go. So I don't recommend this at all. If you're not a partner and you do have transcoding and you're doing 720p, this is also overkill for you. So if you're doing a 720p 60 broadcast, I would even go as far as to say if you're doing CPU encoding, you can probably leave this around 5,000. If you're doing NVENC encoding, which is their hardware encoder, then bump it up to 6, I guess. It doesn't really matter that much with the new NVENC encoder, but I'll get into why I'm not using it in a second. So X264 here, this is your encoder. It's not the codec. I hear a lot of people saying codec. And this is mostly a learning video, so I'm just kind of trying to walk you guys through some of these terms. So your X264 is a software encoder. It encodes in whatever codec you would like it to encode in. The default and the majority of people will want to be using H.264. That is the codec that you'd be using. It's very efficient. Good size to quality ratio in H.264. So I'm going to be using, for mine, I have 8,000 bitrate, and I leave mine on the medium CPU usage preset sometimes. Kind of depends on what I'm playing. If I'm actually playing something like RimWorld, like we've been doing lately, I leave it at medium, which is why it's at medium now. If we're playing something that's a bit more graphically intensive, something like Satisfactory, for example, there's a lot of foliage, a lot of things moving around and stuff, I bump this down to slow. Now, I don't recommend you do this unless you have a dedicated stream box or you have a really powerful CPU with your single PC setup, something like a 9900K or 9700K or an 8700K, which is what I was using before. If you're doing a 720p 60 stream, an 8700K that's overclocked up to around like 4.8 could easily handle this. In my experience doing it for over a year with that CPU, you can handle slow. That being said, medium is usually where people live, and if you have a game with low movement, going slow is kind of overkill, so you can leave it at medium if you'd like to. Profile high, any modern computer, any modern CPU should be able to handle high for that. The main profile is mostly for a little bit older CPUs, and baseline should probably not be used by anyone who's serious about streaming at this point. So just leave it at high unless you're having problems, then bump that down to main. No reason to do any tuning, but if you do happen to do some of these tuning, you might find your stream quality suffers, your latency gets a little bit poorer or better, back and forth. I leave this at none. There's no reason to add like a film filter or anything like that to it, so just leave it alone. And that's how I set up my streams. Now you'll notice that I have rescale output checked here. And some of you who are used to this kind of thing might notice, like, why are you rescaling the output here in the streaming tab instead of doing it in the video tab? Because right now in my video tab, I have 2560 by 1440, and that is both the base, which is your rendered resolution for your monitor, as well as the output scaled resolution is the exact same. When you do these both the same, the downscale filter doesn't matter. And you can see, I'm at 60 frames per second. If you do it here, if you scale your output here, for example, if you are on a 1440p monitor and you're streaming 720p 60 and you're just on Twitch, you should use the video tab to rescale it down to 720p. You should be using that feature here. Okay, you shouldn't be doing it in this. The reason being is that this is going to use your encoder to rescale the output. That makes it harder for your encoder. It's going to put more leverage, more pressure on your encoder to rescale this. This here uses your graphics card to rescale it, which is a much more effective, much more efficient way of rescaling video. So if you're only doing this for, Twitch, or you're only live streaming, this is where you should be rescaling. However, if you're also recording, okay, and this is the reason why I do it differently. If you're recording and you want to record your gameplay in like say 1440p 60, or you're streaming in 720 but you want to record it in 1080p, right? Then that's when you have to do it differently. That's when you have to do it by the tab. In my situation, which is a good example here, I'm recording my gameplay in full 1440p 60. So because I'm recording my file at 1440p 60, I need my output resolution to be that resolution. So for the stream, it gets downscaled for the recording, it doesn't get downscaled, right? That's how we're doing this. Now ignore all this setup. This is actually an experiment that I'm running here to try to get a better, and I just messed this up by scrubbing over top of it. I'm trying to figure out if there's a better way to do this kind of stuff. I'm actually going to put this at what I've found to be effective for the time being. I think we'll go like that for now. Okay, so my recording tab, let's talk about that. Go back to standard. So for my recordings, I do it in the MKV recording format. This is an MKV container. Okay, there are codecs and there are containers, okay? The container is sort of just like your bucket, and then your codec is sort of like the language in which the content inside the bucket is written, okay? So the MKV recording format, a lot of you are doing MP4. Highly recommend you switch it to MKV, and I'll show you why in a bit. Also, with your .move files, some of you are using .move. Highly recommend you switch out of MP4 and out of .move. If you're still using FLV, definitely switch out of that as well. It's very old. Utilizing either MKV or TS is a pretty good mix here. I'm not entirely sure why anyone would choose M3U8. I'm not really sure why they would do that. I have actually no experience with that container at all. So I'm gonna say MKV is probably the superior choice here for recording. Reason being is because it has recording redundancy. It has, when you record to this container, if something happens to OBS or something happens to your computer and it crashes for whatever reason, if you did not hit, if you're rocking MP4 here or .move here, if you didn't hit stop record, your file is gone. Like, it's corrupted. And the reason for that is because these two containers need the header information for that video codec written at the end of the file. So when you click stop recording, it then writes its header information, which helps with playback and it helps your editor know where things are. MKV writes the header information as you go. So you don't lose everything because you have header information written, okay? MKV is the superior format for recording. Highly recommend you use this instead as a failsafe. Now you might be thinking, well, I need MP4 for my editor. And that's true. That's where remuxing come in. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Audio tracks, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Notice I have 4 of these selected. There's a reason for that, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Also, let's go back to the streaming tab really quick. Notice that my audio track here is 5, okay? Again, this is my setup. You do you, man. And if it works for you, it works for you. I'll show why I have that in a second. So encoder, this is my recording tab. I use the new NVENC H.264 encoder for my recordings. This is because this encoder, while it is pretty good, it does require a higher bitrate to get that crisp quality. I've been experimenting, okay? You'll notice that this says CQP 18. I've been experimenting with different things. I've been a pretty high proponent, a pretty high, should I say, a pretty strong proponent of using CBR for recordings in the past because I want that good constant bit rate for quality. I've been experimenting with CQP, going back and forth between them, and I'm still not set on what my level is here, but I'm thinking 16, 15 or so is probably around a good mix for me. But for the time being, every video on this channel that you've seen so far has been recorded with CBR 48,000, at least in the last few months. I'd use max quality preset, high profile again, and with the new NVENC encoder, notice there's a difference between NVENC H.264 and the new. If you're using OBS Studio, you have access to the new one, and the new one is better than the old one, for sure. I leave all these settings at their base, except for B-frames. I bumped this up to 4. I have look ahead and psychovisual tuning turned on. These two things use more GPU resources. So if you are somebody who is on a single PC setup, you may have problems when you hit these two buttons. I don't think you will, unless you're like really hitting your GPU hard and you're like riding like 95% already, then yeah, you're probably gonna take it over and you're gonna have drop frames and skip frames and stuff. But this is how my setup looks for now. Okay, audio tab, I have 320 on 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then 160 on track 5 and 6. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I do not use the replay buffer. So that's my encoding settings. That's what I'm rocking with. Now, why do I use track 5 for streaming and tracks 1, 2, 3, and 4 for recording? Well, with these checked, when you record a file, it's going to write 4 different tracks onto the same file, synchronized. Okay? Streaming, when you're broadcasting live, you only have the ability to send 1 track of audio. You can't send multi-track when you're streaming. Your streaming service only receives 1 encoded track of audio. So that's 5. Let's take a look really quick. If I go ahead, I'm just gonna go ahead, let's just apply it, it's fine. Let's go ahead really quick. I'm gonna go to Advanced Audio Properties. Now that's either here in the Edit menu, or you can click the little settings cog in any one of these and get there with this. It's both the exact same window will open up. So this is my settings for audio. Now remember, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are being used for recordings, and 5 is being used for streaming. So here's my different sources. I have my mic, I have my Elgato 4K 60. Again, this is a 2 PC setup. So I have a capture card that's bringing in my gaming rig. If you don't have a capture card that's bringing in your gaming rig, then one of your desktop audio tracks most likely is where your game sound is coming from, okay? And you might be wondering, how do I get desktop audio A, desktop audio B? Highly recommend you take a look at something called virtual audio cable. It's very cheap and integrates multiple audio cable sources into Windows directly here. So you get cable A, cable B, and you can alternate between them. And more importantly, you can monitor the sound coming to these cables without having to worry about the sound coming through the rest of the stream. So for example, I can have my system sounds coming through cable A, I can have music coming through cable B, I can monitor the sound with my headphones to both of these cables and hear that sound coming through my headphones. But I can also choose, if I want to not write the music that's coming in to the recorded file. I can say, I don't want cable B to record to the track that's being recorded. It will come through the stream, but I don't want it in my recorded file. That's how you can do that flexibility. In that situation, for example, I have my mic. Let's just go in order on tracks here. So Elgato 4K 60, my game sound being written to track 1. My mic track being written to track 2. Desktop audio A, this is my system alerts, right? So anything that comes through my system, donations, subs, etc., all of those sound effects are coming through track 3. And desktop audio B, this is where I'm into Discord, or when I have music playing in the background, that's being written to track 4. My recorded file, when I'm editing, will have these 4 tracks written into it. Okay? And that gives me the flexibility in editing to modify these. You may also notice I have a sync offset milliseconds, and right now that's at 10. I'm actually going to change that to 12. I've been tweaking this, right? It's an experimental process. What this sync offset is it's a way to delay a certain audio source from playing offset from real time. The reason why I do this for my mic is because my camera has to come through the feed for OBS, and it has to encode. Now my camera is a Logitech Brio 4K. I'm obviously not using it in 4K because that would be silly. I'm using it for 1080p 60 webcam, so my webcam can seem pretty crisp. I am in the works of trying to save up for a proper DSLR. I'm thinking about getting like a Sony A6300, and I'll probably be using that in the future at some point. But before I do that, my camera speaks, and I find that my lips are a bit behind my voice, and I don't like how my lips are a little bit behind my voice. So I can delay my voice by this many milliseconds and attempt to sync it up perfectly so I don't have to worry about it. If you find yourself out of sync, you can always just move your voice track slightly on the editing timeline later, which is a completely different scope for another video. And you can, sync it up that way too if you'd like to, just like visually syncing it. Now I also monitor and output both of these sources. And again, this is for a dual PC setup. The reason why I do that is because I'm monitoring the output so I can hear it. And that goes through my default monitoring source, which if I go back into settings, go to advanced, audio monitoring device. At this point, it's my earbuds. So anything I'm monitoring will go through my earbuds instead. I can also change this to my headphones if I'm going to work with my headphones, but that's what this is. I also disable Windows audio ducking as well. So that's that. Whatever I'm using to monitor my audio, that's what that comes in on. I'm also listening to my cables. So if I come into Windows settings, I right click, go to sounds, I get this window. And if I go to my recording tab in the sounds area, I go to cable A output, I can go to properties on this, and we're listening to cable A with the earbuds. So all my system sound, my default audio device on my system is cable A, and I'm able to get that through my headphones or my earbuds by listening to cable A in Windows. Okay, same thing with cable B. I can listen to cable B with the earbuds. So I hear what through the earbuds, I hear this. And I'm also monitoring, you might notice, my microphone as well. Now this takes a little bit to get used to, but I promise you it is very rewarding once you get used to it. And I swear to God, once you get used to it, you also most likely will never go back to not monitoring your audio. What this means is I hear my voice in my headphones in real time. There's no lag, there's no delay, and there's also no sync offset when you do this either. This is the sync offset being written to file. It doesn't offset your monitor. So you will hear your voice. You will hear exactly what your microphone hears, like I'm hearing it right now in my own ear. That's what you'll hear as you talk. That's going to be a little bit weird for people to hear themselves talk, but it does two really important things for you, in my opinion. The first thing it does is it guarantees that if you can't hear yourself, you know that your audience cannot hear you either. Because as soon as I do this, I can no longer hear myself. Like I can't hear what's happening. Now you guys are still hearing me because it's still being written to track, because again, it's a separate instance of OBS that's recording this video. But if this is muted, I won't hear my own voice in my headphones anymore, and that means neither can my audience. So there's no more instances where you're gonna go, oh shoot, I was muted this whole time, what a noob mistake. You won't make those noob mistakes anymore. Because if you can't hear yourself, they can't hear you either. As soon as you can hear yourself, you know that they can hear you too. It's a very, very good way of doing it. The second thing it does is it makes you aware of how you sound. Now, I know that seems obvious, but what you might find is that you're gonna speak differently when you can hear yourself. You will pronounce your words better. You will speak more clearly. You will be more entertaining. You'll have more emotion, more oomph in your voice when you do that, more projection when you do that. Because if you sound boring, you're gonna hear yourself sounding boring, and you're gonna know you sound boring. You're gonna alter how that is. So at any point in time, if you get the chance to try and work on that, give it a try, monitor your own voice. Yes, it is going to be weird when you first start it. You're gonna go, oh, I don't like this. And if you can get through that phase, I promise you it's worth it. It just is. Okay, so going back to this window here, right? So I have my mic is on track 2, audio, desktop audio A is on track 3, desktop audio B on track 4, and then all 4 of these are also ticked for track 5. This allows me to have all 4 of these sent to the stream, but have them divided in the recorded file when I record, right? Because my recorded file is not recording track 5. It doesn't need to, because all those tracks are already in 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a look at how my stream setup for this works. Now, one of the things I have to tell you is how to remux a file, because I told you to go with MKV. All you're gonna do, if you're gonna be recording with MKV, little refresher on where that is, output, recording, and MKV is your recording format. If you output at MKV, you're gonna find MKV files in the directory. What you're gonna do is you're gonna go up to File, Remux Recordings. You're gonna find a recording that you have. Now, these are all my recordings, and I have some of them saved until I've edited the video for them, or long after they've been uploaded, or long after they've been remuxed, etc. So a lot of these files are videos that I have not done yet, and I always keep my source MKV file until I've uploaded the video. After that, I dump the MKV file, but I keep the MP4 for a little while longer just in case I need it. And then after about a month or so, I'll also dump the raw MP4 file that came from the recording, but I always keep my episodes. I keep all of my uploaded files because you never know what's gonna happen to YouTube. And like if YouTube decides blah, or you get your account banned for some reason, or anything happens, you got all your files still, and you can get those re-uploaded if you want to on another platform or on another channel if need be. So I keep those. The MKV files though, you're just gonna select one, and it will automatically give you a targeted file here. Now, if you have a group of recordings and you want it like it's a multi-recording session, you can also go ahead and select a range of files, and it will put their whole range in there too. By default, it will remux them to the exact same directory that that file is already at. But if you, I'm just gonna go ahead and clear it really quick, but if I do this one, I'd like to get a small one, but I don't know which ones of these are small because I can't quite tell. So this is a pretty small one, 268 megabytes. It's a really small one actually. Let's get one that's a bit more realistic in size. All right, 3.47 gigabytes. That's not that big, but you can use it as a reference here. So with this file, this is about 3.5 gigabytes big. I'm gonna go ahead and just tell it to remux. This is going to SSD at the moment. You know, just take that into what it is. It's going to a regular SSD, but I'm gonna hit remux, and this is not a transcode. This is not like what Handbrake does, right? Handbrake is transcoding the media. You don't need to do that, at least not yet. Take MKV to MP4. All you're doing is taking the exact same video with the exact same codec, and you're rewrapping it in a new container. But the good part about this is MKV has your header information written throughout the file. This rewrap will stick that information in like an MP4 likes it, so your header information ends up at the end like everything else does. I hit remux on this file, and this is how long it takes for something that is, I don't know, 3.5 gigabytes. It's not that big of a problem. This actually also might be slower because I'm currently actively recording. I don't know if that was slower because of that, but you're gonna notice if I go into that directory now, you're gonna see that this is the base file, which is 3.47 gigabytes, and here's the remuxed file at 3.47 gigabytes, right? It's the exact same size. You are, of course, doubling the storage you need because now you have two versions of that video, but now you can work with this one because it's a more accepted MP4. More importantly, though, if your encoder crashed or something happened with OBS, you don't have to worry about it anymore because you at least have some of it, and then you can remux it and work with what you have. Okay, so for the last part of this video, I want to talk about the process leading up to the editing phase and sort of how I go from there. I'm gonna take the file menu here, go to remux, and again, we're gonna take that MKV file that we have, and we wanna remux that to MP4. I believe it's gonna be the one that says 173203. This one here is the active file that I'm recording right now. So there's not a whole lot of size to this one, and there's no point in remuxing it since I'm actively writing to it right now. So I'm gonna go to this one instead, and we're gonna go ahead and just hit remux, and that's all it takes. That entire video up to this point took that long to remux. You see, it's really not worth recording direct to MP4. Do the MKV approach. You'll thank yourself later, especially when OBS crashes on you with unexpected consequences or whatever, right? Okay, so what we want to do is I'm going to take that MP4 file, get it into a new project. First, I want to talk about the settings really quick. I'm going to leave this in the Weedcraft folder. I'm doing a series right now on the game Weedcraft Incorporated, so that's what this folder is. So just ignore that, but I'm going to leave the directory the same way as it is. I'm going to just go ahead and leave this named Untitled as well, because I don't think it matters. Here are the settings that actually matter. We're going to leave the renderer on Mercury Playback Engine GPU Accelerated CUDA. If you have an NVIDIA graphics card, you'll have CUDA available to you. If you're on an AMD graphics card, I honestly don't know what that's going to be, but I'm pretty sure AMD has their own equivalent to it. I have no interest at all in AMD graphics cards, so for this demonstration, I'm purely talking about things that happen related to CUDA, which is exclusive to NVIDIA graphics cards. So that's my renderer. You want to leave this. You do not want software only, trust me. You want this acceleration. Then I'm gonna go to ingest settings. You can work with scratch disks if you want to save things in a custom area or whatever. I just messed this up entirely, didn't I? I totally did. We're just gonna go same as project. But I'm gonna go back to ingest settings. Now, by default, what's gonna happen here is when you bring in an MP4 file, you're bringing in an H.264 encoded file. So I think for the time being, let me just show you what I mean by that. We're gonna go ahead and just leave it ingest settings alone, and we'll hit OK on this. We're gonna right click here, and I'm gonna go to import, and I'm not gonna go into this folder. It's actually in this folder here. This is the file we just remuxed. So see, the names are the same, but this one is MP4. Pop this in. Now this is a really small file. It's also not that long, so there's a good chance that this won't take very long. You can see on the bottom right corner, Adobe Premiere is conforming the waveforms for this, or it's generating peak files basically. That's its process for giving you a visual of the audio in this track. So I'm gonna go ahead and just make a new sequence from this clip, and that will make sure that our recorded clip has this exact, the sequence has the exact same settings as the clip. Now, you're gonna notice that there's not 4 audio tracks on this, there are 2, and that's because, again, I used a separate instance of OBS to record this that I'm currently recording now. And if I go into settings, you're gonna see that in my output settings for recording, we only have tracks 1 and 2 selected. This is CQP16. We only have tracks 1 and 2 selected with this profile because I don't need to have system alerts and music and stuff for this profile, since this profile is what I'm been using to do my general Let's Plays on YouTube that are not recorded live. So I have 2 separate profiles depending on how I'm doing it. So anyway, to simplify things, when I'm not live, I use this profile, and this profile only needs my mic and the game audio. So that's why there's only 2 tracks. So there would still be 2 tracks though. So if I expand this and expand this, you'll see that this is my audio and how I've been talking, and you can see that the peak files have been generated so we can see them both. That's what that was over there. And now I can play around and edit with this any way I want. You can see that they are perfectly synced and attached and linked together, and they're synchronized. So you won't have to worry about, like, say for instance, recording with Audacity to your audio. There's no point to doing that. You're just making extra work for yourself. Write the audio track here and make sure that your settings are at 320 kilobits, and you're basically the same thing. You're making more work for yourself. Don't use Audacity like that if you don't have to. Now you can also right click this and unlink, and that gives you the ability to select each of these tracks individually, also apply effects to them individually, etc. That's kind of beyond the scope of this video. The editing tactics are kind of up to you how you want to do it. But the important thing here is, and this is probably not going to be a good example since it's a small file, but I can let this run like this. And if this was a more complicated file, what you'd probably find is that your playback on this is pretty skippy. If there's complicated rendering stuff happening here, it'd be a bit more skippy playback. You can also, in Premiere anyway, you can change to doing full resolution. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there's a pretty good delay from the time I hit my spacebar to the time this starts to play sometimes. Again, not the greatest example of this because it's not a very complicated file. It's pretty easy to play this one back. But if it was a more complicated file, you'd have that problem where it's just gonna be skippy playback. You may even find yourself, if you have a particularly large project and you have several, 20 or 30 clips in here, you might find yourself having really bad performance because your file is still H.264 encoded. The H.264 codec does not work very well at all with a nonlinear editing system like Adobe Premiere or its competitors, I guess Resolve. It doesn't really work well in Resolve either. You're gonna get skippy playback is what I'm trying to say. So to prevent that, what you can also do is a lot of people will tell you to transcode it into something else. And that is basically what we're going to do, but we're gonna do it a bit better. We're gonna do it in a bit better way. Let me go ahead and delete this for now and just kill all of this. We're gonna do this transcoding thing in a little bit better way. If you're noticing terrible performance with H.264 files, your MP4 files in Premiere, you can save yourself a lot of time, especially if your clips are really long, like 5, 6, 7 hour clips like I have. You're gonna take your live stream, make it into 5, 6 episodes. You can save yourself a lot of headache by turning on, let me just go to project settings, ingest settings. This screen here, remember we had, here's where your CUDA thing goes. You just made a new project, right? You get to this window again by going to File, Project Settings, and then you want to ingest settings. When you ingest, you can choose to either copy it, which is another way of just basically duplicating the file. You don't really need that. Or you can choose to transcode the footage, which makes a whole new full quality version of the files, which is what, like, say, for instance, Handbrake and stuff would kind of do for you. You don't need to do that either. What we're going to do is we're going to create something called Proxies. Now, creating a proxy file is a really fancy way of saying we're going to create an editor-friendly file, such as something that's in ProRes 422, or in my case, what I would prefer using, it would be, oh, do we not have that on this computer? My other computer has 422 LT. And I like to do that too. You can also use Cineform as well. This is a codec from GoPro, but it works really well with Adobe Premiere Pro. So you can choose that as well. I'm also noticing that DNX HD is not on this. HR is on this though, but anyway. 422 is fine. Proxy. What you're gonna see is it's gonna make a 540p version of this. Now my recorded files are 1440p resolution. These are higher than 1080p quality, but we're gonna be creating 540p files. These are very small, and also they're in the ProRes 422 codec instead of H.264. What that means for the non-techie people is it's in something called an intermediate codec. The intermediate codecs work very well for editors because they're intended to work with editors. So it's like it's destined, right? The proxy files are in a codec that editors love working with, and so you'll get very little delay, very little problems at all when it comes to editing the files. Now that is going to be the setting we're going to use now. Proxy destination, you can also just say same as project. You can use the project a preset destination, so you can have, like, for instance, all of your proxy files located in one directory no matter what project it is. I'm going to leave it as same as project for now. Going to hit OK. Then we're going to try that same import. I'm going to import this MP4. Now this is H.264. It's not an editor-friendly codec. I'm going to hit OK, and when I import the file, now that we're set to do auto transcoding, Media Encoder will open up, and it will immediately begin transcoding this file into a proxy file. You don't have to do anything. It starts doing it automatically, and you can carry on with your day. Now this takes a little bit of time, but if you go to Edit, Preferences, and then come down to Playback, your playback settings, if you check this box off, it says Pause Media Encoder Queue during playback. If you take this box off, which I only recommend you do if you have a really great computer, because otherwise you're going to bog down your whole computer. So if you have a great CPU, turn this off, hit OK, and now you can go ahead and edit with this. I'm going to just go ahead and right-click, say New Sequence from Clip. You can go ahead and edit with this all you want. And while you're making changes and editing with this, the transcoding process is still going to continue in the background. So you can kind of do whatever you want and play around with this, and it will not change this at all, right? Now you need a beefy computer for that, because you're going to be using a lot of your CPU while this is happening. Now right now it says I'm only using 33%. That's because I'm limiting Media Encoder. I'm limiting Media Encoder and what it's capable of. But aside from that, yeah, normally you'd be using a lot more if you needed it. And so now that you have proxy files, it will automatically substitute the full resolution version that you're editing with. It will automatically substitute that with the 540p, ProRes 422 version of the file that you're working with. And you won't have to deal with the fact that this is a yellow line anymore. You won't have to deal with the fact that this is going to be glitchy playback. It should be really great for you in this. It will be much lower resolution for you over here, but it will be much more fluid playback for you, and you can manage it and edit it easier. Then when you go to export the file, when you're done editing, Premiere knows it's a proxy here. So Premiere is going to take the full resolution version, the H.264 version that it made a proxy of. It's going to utilize the information in that source video to write the final video. So the proxy is only here for you to tell Premiere what to do with the main file, right? With the H.264 file. That's a great way to do your workflow if you have Premiere Pro. It's one of the biggest reasons why I love Premiere Pro for Media Encoder. I have my beefs with Media. I have my beefs with Premiere. There are things I wish they would change. But one of the things that I think is pretty undisputed in my industry is that Adobe Media Encoder is a phenomenal program. It's phenomenally good at what it does. It does things very quickly, does things very efficiently. It generates very high quality products. And because it's integrated so well with Premiere and it can run in the background, that makes Premiere a pretty good fit for it. So this has been a very long video. Hopefully this helps give you guys a big picture as to what I do. If anyone has any questions about any other part of the workflow, feel free to give me a comment down below. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.